Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Malcolm and Marie. Let's talk about it. So Malcolm and Marie is directed by Sam Levinson, who also created the famous show Euphoria. Now, I haven't gotten a chance to see Euphoria yet, but there is no doubt, okay, there is no dispute that this was such a breakout hit that so many people latched onto, and it did wonders for Zendaya's career because off of the back of her performance on that show, she actually ended up getting an Emmy win. So I will definitely make it a priority to finally check out this show before its second season hits. But I have to say that nonetheless, going into this film after having seen the trailer, I wasn't the most excited. I wasn't the most excited, okay? I know that, everyone loves Zendaya. She is great. She's so stunning. She's so fashionable and she's so talented. Like, yay, Zendaya. We love her. We love to see her working. And of course, we also love John David Washington, the star of Christopher Nolan's first ever diverse film. Even though in that film, he was kind of sucked dry when it comes to charisma and likability, but whatever. Overall, I'm fans of the cast of this film, which is literally just those two. But I have to say that the trailer left me a little bit underwhelmed because I knew exactly the kind of film that this was going to end up being, and I knew that it was going to be tough, a drag for me personally, but we'll see in my review whether or not I think that it delivered on what I thought it was going to be or whether or not it ended up being more. But before we get into my thoughts, as always, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's get into this. Like I already said, I'm a huge fan of both of these actors and I was fully expecting them to deliver when it comes to their performances in this film, because that is really at the center of the film. The film is wholly driven by performance. It's wholly driven by the acting. There isn't much else other than the fact that the film has great music, okay, some of which is by Labyrinth, which is great because just recently I was thinking about how underrated Labyrinth is because I recently discovered the Euphoria soundtrack, side note, and also just the combination of different tracks that he was able to put together I think was very fitting, especially thematically for what was going on screen. So good for him getting involved in another Zendaya and Sam Levinson project. Other than that, you just have the fact that the film is in black and white and it's set in this beautiful home which is located in the middle of nowhere that the production company seems to have rented out for John David Washington's character Malcolm. But all of that is just embellishing, it's just dressing for the main course, which is of course the powerful performances of these two actors. Now I have to say that there are moments in this film where I feel like they're really hamming it. They're really hamming it up, especially John David Washington. Like, his character is a character. He definitely takes up all of the space, all of the air in the room. He goes on these long, endless tirades. He's definitely an abrasive character, which is definitely the point, to be fair, in John David Washington's portrayal of this character. Still, he very much takes that on board. He takes that character trait on board and turns it up to not even an 11, like an 100, quite frankly, in some moments. So I do think that there are cases where they're really hamming it up in this film. But honestly, when you have a film like this where the performances are literally the be-all end-all of the entire film, they are the center, the core of the film, and without good performances that kind of draw you into the story, the film kind of falls apart. I think it's kind of warranted to act the hell out of it and even exaggerate quite a bit because that is the most important and most engaging part of the film overall. But now that we've talked about how the actors kind of deliver the words on the script, let's talk about the script itself. Let's talk about the words coming out of their mouths, because this is where I kind of had a few issues. First of all, this film is set during the premiere night of Malcolm's first ever feature film that has received a ton of praise. It's set to get a ton of good reviews. Seems to have been very well liked amongst the people in his industry and critics in his industry. So he's on a high right now. When he comes back to this, rented house, he is on a high. He's talking about how great he is, and he's also talking about how he wishes people would compare him to the great white directors as well as comparing him to black directors like Spike Lee and Barry Jenkins. And he is just on this high, on this narcissistic high about how great his film is and how well it's been received. Meanwhile, in the background, we have Zendaya's character Marie kind of, stomping about the place. She seems less enthused than he is, and clearly something is off. And that's what sets things off for the rest of the film, where we have this confrontation between these two characters, sometimes a very explosive confrontation between the two, where we're really trying to get to the bottom of what's upsetting both of them when it comes to their relationship and the pitfalls of their relationship and what they haven't really been able to say to each other throughout it. Now, I actually think that this is what the film does really well, peeling back all of these layers of this confrontation, trying to get down to the core of the issue, especially when it comes to the character of Marie, who seems to have all of these reasons for being upset, but they never seem to be the real reason why she has an issue with Malcolm. And he just tries to like go through all of the stuff that she's saying to try to get to the core of the issue. And I think the film does a good job of kind of displaying that, kind of giving us a bit more insight as these arguments go along into what the characters actually want, what truly motivates them, and why it is that they feel this friction in their relationship. However, because of the way that this film is structured, ultimately we're never able to get as much information about these characters as I personally like to see. This is yet another example of the stage play film. The stage play film that I have seen a lot this past year. I mean, we saw this in the case of One Night in Miami with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and of course in the case of this film here, where the film feels as though it's an adaptation of a stage play, and in the other cases they actually are adaptations of plays. But in this case, this was written by the director and it's only confined to this limited environment because it was filmed during the pandemic. So in this case, it feels like it has the same limitations to what you would see in a stage play, where it feels as though you're confined to the three walls of the stage and you have to just make do with a very limited space. And of course, at the center of that project would be the acting. That's the true focus there, and it's very much similar to this film. But as I've said before, that's not my favorite. That's not usually the kind of film that I'm drawn towards, which is why when I saw the trailer, I felt a little bit underwhelmed, because I knew that that would be the kind of film that we were getting. And as a result of that, these characters don't feel as rich as I would have liked them to. I feel like a lot of times a lot of words come out of their mouths, but I don't really get a sense of where they come from. You know, I don't really get a sense of who they are other than the words that are coming out of their mouths. And I do think that this is where films have an advantage over plays, where you can see characters in different environments. You can get a sense of the wider world that's been built in a film. Overall, this kind of storytelling isn't my favorite, as I've said before, because it seems to drag on with little purpose. When it comes to films that have that clear three-act structure, where you have the beginning, the inciting incident, and then you have the middle where I can't remember what the storytelling term is for the middle. The journey, I guess. It's been a while since I've done English language, forgive me. But where you have the middle, the journey takes place, and then the end where you have the conflict resolution, I believe it's called. That structure pleases me, okay? That structure makes me very happy because you have a ton of freedom to work within that structure, but the structure is there nonetheless. But here the structure seems to be, they have an argument and then they take a break to have a bath or eat or something. Then they have another explosive argument and then they take another break to eat or shower or whatever, or pee. There's a lot of peeing in this film as well, which makes it authentic, I guess. But then they have another explosive argument, so it just feels so repetitive. It doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. It doesn't feel like there's going to be a satisfying conflict resolution, which ultimately there isn't. Alright, so next up, let's talk about some of the other words that were coming out of these characters' mouths, because like I said, the performances were at the center of this film, and so there was a lot of talking, there's a lot of dialogue here. And these other words have really nothing to do with the specific characters, if we're being honest, but everything to do with the director speaking through these people directly towards the audience and specifically towards the critics. Yes, there is a lot of commentary on film criticism in this film. I personally didn't feel attacked at all because I'm not a film critic. I just do movie reviews on YouTube. Like, what do I know? But there was a lot of covert, or should I say very overt, messaging towards film critics here. And to be fair, I think that a lot of the topics that the film touched on were actually very interesting and actually very valid. So first of all, we have the exploration of the fact that film critics these days seem to be more like weathermen. As Malcolm explains, they seem to be more interested in being in tune with the socio-political landscape du jour, as opposed to focusing on the film that's right in front of them, as opposed to correctly critiquing the technical aspects of said film. Instead, they want to talk about, you know, social justice issues. They want to seem woke in their articles, and that's particularly the case when you have black filmmakers or filmmakers of color, because all of a sudden all these critics and journalists can see is the color of the filmmaker. It's no longer just about telling the story that's on screen. There must be some sort of political agenda. There must be some sort of, socio-political message enveloped in the story that's on the screen. Even if you're making a Lego movie, as John David Washington's character says, they are seen as innately political. They are seen as always trying to politicize the story that they're trying to tell. Like I said, I think this is a very valid point. I think this is definitely something that we've been seeing lately when it comes to film criticism. Is a really valid point and a really valid idea to explore in a film. But I don't necessarily think that this was the film to do so, especially in the confinement of this house where you just have these two characters shouting at each other about stuff that isn't really the core reason for why they're upset with one another. It's just an offhanded, point that Malcolm is trying to make, but it's not really the reason why he's upset with Marie, why he feels dissatisfied in general. He's dissatisfied because he's insecure, but whatever. The point is that in another film, in another more sophisticated film, we would have seen this on screen as opposed to have this be shouted at us by Malcolm. We would have seen Malcolm at his premiere, which again may not have been possible because this film was filmed during the pandemic, but we would have been able to see this play out during Malcolm's film premiere, where he is interacting with different kinds of film critics from different backgrounds, and we would have been able to infer what this message is, as opposed to having Malcolm, like I said, shout this to us directly, or really shout this to critics watching this film directly in a very on-the-nose way. And also another issue with films that do this, films that try to speak directly to critics about the issues that they have with critics, is that it then opens you up to criticism that's kind of very meta, like it works on an even higher level. I'm explaining this so poorly. Let me just clarify with a perfect example. On one occasion, Malcolm talks about how he's upset that male filmmakers and male directors are often accused of filming things through the male gaze when it comes to their female characters on screen. But then you have he's saying this to a Zendaya who has been half naked for literally the majority of the film. Literally, there are so many instances where I felt like the way that Zendaya was shot was quite sexualized. Like, it didn't feel casual. It felt very, intentionally sexual. And I just couldn't help but think, like, this is rich coming from Sam Levington, who's shooting her in such a way that makes her look like more of a sexual object. Like, I was thinking, like, you're talking about the male gaze and how this character is disgruntled by the fact that because he is a male director, he is innately accused of seeing through a male gaze, whilst also shooting the character of Marie through the male gaze. Like, do you see how meta this has become? You see how you've opened yourself up to this scrutiny even more because you're pointing it out with this disgruntlement, when really you could also be accused of doing the same thing to this female character. When it comes to the script of this film overall, I have to say I wasn't the biggest fan of the way that the characters kept using these obscenely long, overly complex, thesaurus words. I wasn't a fan of how the dialogue sounded like someone had, right-click synonyms on Microsoft Office and tried to find these like sophisticated words for everyday language. I wasn't a fan of that. It didn't feel real or authentic or organic. I think this is especially the case for the character of Marie, because it's established that Malcolm has, college education, so therefore it's organic for him to use words like this. Not necessarily, but whatever. The point is, I think the character of Marie is established as being someone who comes from a rougher background. Again, it's never really clarified. We don't really find out much about her in this film, but it seems as though she comes from a rougher background. So I didn't quite get why she was using the same language as him. Like, this would have been an opportunity to establish the different classes that these characters come from through their language, through the words that they use, but they seem to speak exactly as each other. So there seems to be no difference in their backgrounds in that front. I mean, they could have still depicted Marie as a smart character without her having to use these thesaurus words in order to differentiate her from John David Washington's college education, which, again, I don't think the college education would warrant that level of obnoxiousness. And finally, let's talk about the major controversy when it came to this film, and that was, of course, the age difference between the two stars. Now, this was interesting. This was an interesting conversation that people were having amongst themselves on Twitter. My 2 cents on this is that I understand both sides. I understand the idea that because Zendaya is a Disney Channel girl that a lot of people watched when they were younger and were used to seeing her in, you know, cute little Disney Channel clothes and whatnot. I think people associated her still as a child actress and therefore had a hard time with her, you know, dealing with these mature themes and being in this relationship with this, you know, older man. So I get why people kind of had that reaction initially. Some people said that it was also driven by race. I'm not sure about that personally. I think it makes more sense that because she's a Disney Channel girl, people still see her as a little girl. And we've seen this for Disney Channel X stars throughout from different races, whether it be Selena Gomez or Miley Cyrus. And that's why we often have that breakthrough moment in their careers where they're no longer little girls and they have to show everyone that they have sex and do drugs and whatnot. Like, that's why. It's because we're used to seeing them in a completely different light, and when they have that moment where we realize that they've grown up, it's always a shock to society. But anyways, I do also understand the other side, that obviously she is an adult and is therefore, you know, entitled to take on a project like this. And the project is very mature. It makes a point to be very mature. Again, it seems very meta in that way that it's like, yes, I am a grown up, I am an adult, I do say the F word, I do have sex. Like, it seems very pointed in that way as well. And not to mention the fact that the subject matter of the film is also intrinsically about the age difference of the characters. Like, it is part of the film, the fact that these characters are so different in their ages, because it very much impacts the character dynamics and the relationship dynamics that they have. So overall, I did enjoy Malcolm and Marie, but my thoughts going into the film were pretty much validated by the end. I did feel like it was very acting heavy, and most of the time the performances very much worked, but there were occasions where it felt like it was a lot. It was a little bit much, and ultimately this still isn't my favorite kind of film, the kind of vibe, the kind of snapshot into someone's life. And it doesn't help the fact that we can't really get out of that specific confined set in the film. I wish we could have seen a little bit more, perhaps even the premiere itself, so that we would have seen how Malcolm interacted with these other people. But again, it was filmed during, you know, the peak of the pandemic, so I understand why that wouldn't have logistically been possible. But with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Malcolm and Marie a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Malcolm and Marie, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.